So thank you to channel viewer Flo the Unraveling, who pointed out Alex Murdaugh's correct birth date is May 27th, 1968. Indeed, I located it via a reference point on Wikipedia, which pointed to a recent interview he went through with law enforcement back in February. It's May 27th, 1968. The video that I put out a couple of days ago was showing this chart, which is for June 20th, 1968. But as it turns out, just about everything I said is correct, because he's born about a month earlier, but the big transits still apply, and some of the comments are now even more true. And what I had pointed out, if you'll recall, was the presence of yod formations. I actually referred to one yod in this chart, but there are actually two. If you look at the new chart, now one yod, the one that I pointed out before, is made by Neptune to Saturn and to Mercury. Yods are two planets in sextile, Saturn, Mercury, and then 150s to the top planet. But as it turns out, you can go in this direction, so that now you have Saturn at the top of the yod toward Neptune, and in this case Uranus-Pluto. The Uranus-Pluto sextiles Neptune, and then they point to Saturn. So there's a lot of yod activity in his natal chart, and as I mentioned in the video that I made, it isn't the type of alignment, the type of formation that I would think would ever be easy unless you were very upright and even hopefully very spiritual, because yods are known to be the finger of God, as it's labeled, but also the finger of fate. And if you go the wrong way, things can get extremely sticky. And this is related to the idea that if you look at a natural chart, Aries as one makes a yod to Scorpio and Virgo, signs that are related to health and death. The aspect itself is definitely problematic. That has been my experience, and connecting it to injuries, health problems, and including death is something that shows up repeatedly when you do astrological research. So you see this in his natal chart, and then you notice that where before, looking at this chart, all the planets were congregated at the end of the sign in Gemini, now you just see Mercury and the other ones are early. But this actually explains the fact that Neptune has been in Pisces since 2011, and as it went into 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, it was traveling through all these planets, in a sense mirroring his unraveling, because Neptune you associated with escapism, drug abuse, and this is what happened to him, opioids, etc. And now Neptune is late in Pisces, and it's connecting to this Mercury, so it's pretty much close to an exact square, not as he was sentenced, but it's going there in the summer. Essentially, this Neptune is definitely in play in the transit. And then you see all kinds of other transits that are very exact and very spooky, namely the fact that when he received his guilty verdict, Saturn, super late Aquarius, you can see it here in the ephemeris, 29 degrees, 22 minutes, but Mercury was there as well. Saturn, Mercury, at the time of the sentencing in late Aquarius, still to some extent opposite this Jupiter, but especially so square his Venus. And then you see the Jupiter-Venus Chiron conjunction. Jupiter-Venus pretty precisely on top of his Eris, Chiron just a little bit forward, but most likely signaling that this Eris in his chart is in a compromised spot. I can't tell what that would be, probably something related to his birth time. But what you do see with Eris is in its glacially slow travel, it has only covered 12 degrees, 13 degrees in his entire life. It's now in the 25-degree range. It's not on top of Saturn. That's earlier. You can see it here in the ephemeris. It's in the 25-degree range, and then backtracks to 24. It's going to be doing this for a decade or more in these degrees. So then you notice that in its transit, which is very long term and extending 10, 12 years, it itself is making a yod as well by doing a 150 to Neptune, and then in this direction, a 150 to Uranus. So he's still enmeshed in this particular pattern, even from the transit level. And then you can add that for more 150 quincunx inconjunct Yod action, Pluto is in its transit very late in Capricorn. But if you check where it's going, you know that it's going to backtrack to 27. Right now, super late, 29 almost, the entry into Aquarius. That connects to the Mercury through a 150 in this direction and to the Jupiter. So this particular alignment is just all over this chart. And the bottom line is that, this man went completely the wrong way and now finds himself incarcerated for life. The Mars return, which is a 2-year cycle, is ironic in that Mars returns typically point to a new start, a new beginning on a 2-year basis. In his case, it's the beginning of his long-term prison sentence. So, in conclusion, this chart even more revealing than the previous chart because it explains how we got here a little better, and the Yod activity is even more intense. I mentioned in the previous video that the Pluto transit was unlikely to be good based on a square to then multiple planets. It's still square Mercury together with Uranus, so transits of Pluto are never going to be easy in this chart, both by being part of these Yod formations as well as the square. And finally, something interesting that I've seen many times when I check a person's progressions, which are the positions of planets in the days after birth, which then equate to years. It's a symbolic measurement, but it's quite amazing how it reflects current circumstances. And in his case, when we look at that particular pattern, his progressed sun right at the very end of Cancer in the 29th degree. And you notice that this puts it in line with the transiting Pluto. Pluto opposing it directly as we speak, but already last year, this year, and next year, and the year after that as well. It's pointing to a period in his life when a big upheaval, a big change is taking place. And keep in mind, it's because of what he has done. There's always a context, meaning you can have this in your chart and it can actually be a very productive transformation from one state to another. However, if you've committed crimes, particularly on this level, then it's extremely dangerous because the change can be lethal in the way it affects your life at that point and for future years.